The unbreakable prison. The asteroid, known as Iraxis Prime, hung in the void like a silent executioner, its jagged surface marred by ancient impact craters and deep fissures. Orbiting a dying star, the prison carved into its heart was the final destination for the most dangerous beings in the galaxy, Deathworlders. Deathworlders were species evolved under the most extreme planetary conditions, making them stronger, faster, and deadlier than most sentients could comprehend. Some had chitinous armor that could deflect plasma fire. Others could rip through steel bulkheads with their claws. A few could even survive in the vacuum of space. The Galactic Council had learned the hard way that no ordinary prison could hold them. In the beginning, they had relied on AI-controlled facilities, trusting machine logic to be incorruptible. It took less than a year for the prisoners to exploit the rigid programming, hacking security systems, and overriding lockdown protocols. Next, they tried cybernetic wardens, artificial bodies designed for combat, faster and stronger than even the deadliest inmates. But the problem wasn't just strength. The prisoners adapted. They found patterns in the machine's responses, baited them into predictable movements, and tore them apart piece by piece. The Deathworlders were too dangerous, too unpredictable, and the only species that had ever proven capable of controlling the uncontrollable was humanity. Which is why Captain Elias Ward now stood in the observation deck of Iraxis Prime, watching as his transport shuttle disengaged from the station. He was a new warden, and he knew exactly what he had signed up for. The only guards at work. Elias exhaled, his breath fogging up the reinforced glass. Below, the cell blocks sprawled outward like the spokes of a mechanical wheel, each housing hundreds of the galaxy's worst nightmares. His gaze locked on a block Theta, where some of the most infamous Deathworlders were held in isolation. "Looks quiet today," a voice muttered beside him. Elias turned to face his second-in-command, Lieutenant Marissa Hale. She was lean, hardened, with the sharp eyes of someone who had seen too many fights, but wasn't done yet. "For now," Elias said. "They always test a new guy." Marissa smirked. "They'll learn fast." He appreciated her confidence, but he knew better than to be arrogant. Every human warden before him had proven that machines failed where humans succeeded, but that success came at a cost. Prisoners would break AI, but prisoners also broke humans. Still, humans had one advantage over any machine. They fought dirty. A test of flesh and blood. The alarm klaxons blared. Elias didn't flinch. He had expected it. "Block Theta," Marissa said, already moving toward the security console. "One of them's acting up." Elias followed, stepping into the high-security surveillance room. The screens flickered to life, showing the cell of Vorik of the Braxis Claw, an 8-foot-tall reptilian warrior with scales tough enough to deflect low-yield plasma shots. Vorik had spent the last 4 years in Iraxis Prime, but he was still testing boundaries. On the monitor, Vorik had positioned himself against the far wall, glaring at the camera. Then, with impossible speed, he lunged, slamming his fist into the reinforced glass of his cell. The shockwave rattled the camera. "That's new," Marissa muttered. Elias watched carefully. Vorik wasn't trying to escape. He was watching for reaction. A machine warden would have activated automated restraints. An alien guard might have panicked. Elias didn't either. He grabbed the intercom. "That all you got?" Vorik's massive head snapped toward the speaker, his vertical pupils narrowing. "You're new," Vorik rumbled. His voice was like grinding stone. "Do you think you will last?" Elias leaned in, his voice calm. "I think you've been in that cell long enough to know that you won't be the one to find out." A long pause. Then, unexpectedly, Vorik grinned, showing jagged fangs. "You humans," he murmured. "Always interesting." The screen flickered as he stepped back into the shadows of his cell. The test was over for now. Elias sighed and turned to Marissa. "Get used to it. They'll try worse before the week's over." Marissa smirked. "Good. I was starting to get bored. Why only humans?" As the prison settled back into uneasy silence, Elias allowed himself a moment of reflection. Machines had failed because they followed logic. Other species had failed because they relied on predictability. But humans? Humans could fight dirty. Humans could be stubborn. Humans could make the impossible work because they had to. That's why Deathworlder prisons were always staffed by humans. Because only mortals could face monsters and refuse to break. Elias rolled his shoulders and turned back toward the surveillance deck. It was going to be a long assignment, and he wouldn't have it any other way. The human factor. Elias Ward had seen war. He had fought on backwater colonies where the air was poison, watched men and women break under the strain of combat, and faced enemies that should have killed him a dozen times over. He had survived all of it, but nothing tested a soldier quite like Iraxis Prime. The prison wasn't just a cage. It was a battle of wills, fought day by day, between the most dangerous beings in the galaxy and the only species reckless enough to keep them contained. As Elias walked through the steel corridors of the prison's security wing, he knew one thing for certain. If you showed fear, you're already dead. The best of the worst. The guard briefing room was filled with humans who had seen more blood and brutality than most soldiers. The men and women seated around the table were scarred, some missing fingers, others with artificial limbs that whirred softly when they moved. They weren't just prison guards. They were survivors. Elias took his place at the front, letting his eyes sweep the room. "All right, let's get one thing clear," he said. "This is my first week here, but I don't need a damn tutorial. I know what we're dealing with." Sergeant Duncan Mendez, a stocky man with a cybernetic arm, snorted. "That's so, Warden." Because most of the last guys thought the same thing, and they didn't make it past year one. Laughter rippled through the room. Dark humor. A survival mechanism. Elias smirked. "Then I guess I'd better learn fast." The amusement faded, and the room settled. These were hard people, but they weren't stupid. They needed a leader who could take the pressure. Lieutenant Marissa Hale stepped up beside him. "The Deathworlders watch everything we do. They test us, waiting for the weak link. That's why the Council only hires humans. AI can be hacked. Other species can be broken. But humans..." She let the thought hang in the air. Elias nodded. "We adapt. We fight back." Mendez grinned. "And we cheat." The room chuckled again, but this time it wasn't just humor. It was understanding. Why the prisoners fear humans. Later that day, Elias walked the maximum security block, observing the cells through reinforced glass. The inmates were quiet, but not passive. They were studying him. A karate warlord, her 4 insectoid arms folded, clicked her mandibles in amusement. A Gallic berserker, an 8-foot-tall mass of muscle and scars, gave him a slow, knowing grin. A Servani mindbreaker, a telepath who had driven entire planets insane, tilted his head as if attempting to read Elias's thoughts. Elias stopped in front of Vorik's cell. The massive reptilian warrior sat cross-legged, watching him with interest. "You have not broken yet," Vorik said. "Give it time," Elias replied dryly. Vorik's fanged grin widened. "Do you know why we Deathworlders fear humans?" Elias raised an eyebrow. "Fear? That's new." Vorik's slitted eyes gleamed. "Is not your strength. You are weaker than many of us. Not your speed. You are slower. Not your intelligence. Some species surpass you." He leaned forward. "It is because you refuse to die properly." Elias frowned. "Come again. You break, but you do not stay broken. You burn, but you keep fighting. You lose, but you never accept defeat. Even when your bodies fail, you find a way to endure. That is unnatural." Elias exhaled, shaking his head. "You think we're unnatural? You regrew a severed arm in 2 days." Vorik chuckled. "Yes, but I was meant to. You humans? You fight against the limits of your own mortality. That is why you are here. That is why the others failed." Elias studied the massive Deathworlder for a long moment. Vorik wasn't just talking about the guards before him. He was talking about every failed attempt to keep prisoners like him contained. The AI, the alien wardens, the machines, they had all been predictable. They had all followed logic. And that was why they had lost. Elias tapped the reinforced glass. "Good talk. But you're still in that cell, and I'm still out here." Vorik chuckled again. "For now, unpredictable survivors." Back in his office, Elias sat down with Marissa. "He's testing you," she said. "I know." She hesitated. "Think he's right? That we're here because we're the only ones who can survive it." Elias exhaled. "Maybe. Or maybe we're the only ones too stupid to quit." She smirked. Same thing, really. He chuckled, then leaned back in his chair. His job wasn't just to keep the prisoners locked up. It was to prove every single day that humans were the only ones who could do it. And he had no intention of failing. The breakout attempt. Elias had known something was wrong the moment he woke up. It was too quiet. Iraxis Prime was never silent. The prison had a rhythm, subtle hums of security systems, the distant clang of guards on patrol, the occasional outburst from Deathworlder inmates testing their limits. Even in the dead of night, the station was alive. But now, something was missing. Elias sat up in his bunk, his pulse quickening. His communicator, always on standby, remained eerily silent. No guard reports. No status updates. His gut tightened. This is bad. Then the emergency alarms blared. The first move. Elias bolted out of bed, grabbing his sidearm and sprinting into the corridor. The red warning lights flashed, casting jagged shadows along the metal walls. He activated his comm. This is Warden Ward. Report. Static. Then a burst of garbled voices. Systems compromised, prisoners, multiple. A deep, guttural roar shook the station. Damn it. They had waited for this moment. The Deathworlders had been patient, watching, testing, learning. Now, they were making their move. He rounded a corner and nearly ran into Lieutenant Hale, who was already armored up, rifle in hand. Blood streaked her forehead, but she was steady. They hit security first, she said. Disabled comms, locked out the AI failsafes, jammed our automated defenses. How many got out? Hale clenched her jaw. Theta block is breached. Elias cursed. Theta block, the worst of the worst. He tapped his earpiece. Mendez, do you copy? A burst of gunfire crackled through the comm, then Mendez's voice. Still alive, but they're everywhere. Gallic, karate, even that damn telepath. We're holding cell block C, but we need backup. The transmission cut. Elias turned to Hale. We move. Now, fighting Deathworlders is different. The corridors were a war zone. A karate warlord, her 4 insectoid arms coated in blood, tore through a barricade like it was paper. A Gallic berserker lifted a human guard by the throat, crushing the man's helmet with sheer force before Elias put 3 rounds in its skull. The bullets didn't kill it, but they slowed it down. Hale tossed a shock grenade, and the electric pulse sent the massive alien convulsing to the ground. Keep moving, Elias barked. They knew how to fight Deathworlders. AI couldn't adapt. Other species couldn't think like humans. But humans? They fought dirty. Elias ducked behind cover as a prisoner with bio-enhanced limbs ripped a security door off its frame and hurled it at them like a discus. He barely dodged in time. Hale fired a plasma charge, searing the creature's shoulder, then finished it with a point-blank shotgun blast. We're losing ground, she gritted out. Elias knew. The prisoners were pushing hard, trying to overwhelm the remaining guards before they could regroup. He tapped in his comm. Mendez, we need a choke point. A moment of static. Then Mendez's voice. We can collapse the south containment wing, force them into one route. Do it. The sacrifice. The next 5 minutes were hell. Elias and his team fought through the corridors, holding their line with sheer stubbornness. The prisoners kept coming, forcing them back step by step. Then Mendez's voice crackled through, detonating in 10 seconds. Get clear. Elias grabbed Hale and dived for cover. A massive explosion shook the station, tearing through the south containment wing. The walls buckled, sealing off part of the prison. The Deathworlders caught in the blast were either buried or cut off from the escape route. Elias coughed, struggling to his feet. Mendez. Silence. Then a weak laugh. Still here, boss. But, don't think I'm walking out of this one. Elias clenched his jaw. Hold tight. Wheel. No time. Mendez's breathing was labored. They're already falling back. You win. Elias closed his eyes. Mendez had bought them precious minutes, but at a cost. The aftermath. The prison held. Barely. Bodies littered the corridors, guards and prisoners alike. Reinforcements finally arrived, locking down the remaining inmates. Elias stood over the wreckage of the south containment wing, staring at the rubble. Somewhere beneath that, Mendez had made his last stand. Hale stood beside him, silent. Finally, she said, "If it weren't for us, they would have won," Elias finished. She nodded. "That's why we're here." Elias exhaled. The Galactic Council would review this. They would analyze the data, the losses, the brutality of the battle. And in the end, they would come to the same conclusion. Only humans could do this job. The price of being human. The cleanup took days. The wounds would take longer. Elias stood in the wreckage of South Containment Wing, where the walls had caved in, sealing off the breakout attempt. The scent of scorched metal and blood still lingered in the air. The fires were out. The prisoners were back in their cells. The alarms had finally gone silent. And yet, the station felt different. The guards who had survived moved through the corridors quieter than before, their expressions harder. The Deathworlders who had tested them now watched from behind reinforced glass, some with grudging respect, others with quiet hatred. Elias knew what they were thinking. The humans won. Again. But victory had come at a cost. A grudging respect. Elias walked past the isolation cells, where the worst of the breakout leaders were now being held. The karate warlord hissed as he passed. The Gallic berserker watched him, silent for once. Then he stopped at Vorik's cell. The massive reptilian was seated in the center, his posture relaxed despite the new restraints binding his arms and legs. His scales were burned in places, still healing. One of his fangs had been broken. He studied Elias for a long moment, then exhaled. "You won." Elias folded his arms. "You sound surprised." Vorik let out a deep chuckle. "Not surprised. Impressed." Elias raised an eyebrow. "That's new." Vorik leaned forward. "You humans, you don't break like machines. You burn." His slitted eyes gleamed. "Even when the odds are against you. Even when logic says you should fall. You still find a way." Elias stayed silent. "You are why this prison holds," Vorik continued. "Not because of your strength. Not because of your weapons. But because you are too stubborn to accept defeat." He smirked, showing jagged teeth. "That is why the others failed." Elias met his gaze. He could see it now. The Deathworlders weren't just testing humans. They were trying to understand them. Because in a galaxy where strength ruled, humans had found another way. They endured. The Council's verdict. 3 days later, the Galactic Council's formal report arrived. The official statement was cold, clinical. It analyzed the prison break, the response time, the casualties. Then came the final conclusion. Automated security systems, compromised. Alien wardens, ineffective. Only human guards successfully contained the Deathworlder uprising. The final decision was clear. All high-risk Deathworlder prisons would now be staffed exclusively by humans. Elias wasn't surprised. The Council had already suspected as much. But seeing in writing felt heavier. Lieutenant Hale sat across from him, reading the same report. "So that's it," she murmured. "It's official." Elias nodded. "Yeah." She closed the report and exhaled. "You think that's a good thing?" Elias thought about Mendez, about the blood-soaked corridors, about the fact that every human here would die on this station someday, fighting to keep the monsters in their cages. Finally, he said, "I think it's the truth." Hale looked at him. Then she smirked. "Hell of a job to be stuck with." Elias let out a dry chuckle. "Yeah, but if it wasn't us, who else could do it?" She didn't have an answer. Welcome to hell. A week later, the new recruits arrived. Fresh-faced, nervous. Their boots echoed in the corridors as they stepped into the most dangerous place in the galaxy. Elias stood at the front, watching them. They reminded him of himself. Years ago, he let the silence hang, let them feel the weight of the prison around them. Then he spoke. "Welcome to Iraxis Prime." He gestured toward the reinforced cell blocks. "You're here because nothing else works. AI fails. Aliens break. Only humans can hold the line." He stepped forward, letting his gaze sweep over them. "You'll fight monsters. You'll lose friends. And if you're lucky, you'll live long enough to understand why we're the only ones who can do this." One of the recruits swallowed. Another shifted uncomfortably. Elias smirked. "Get comfortable, rookies." He gestured toward the prison's heart, where the Deathworlders waited. "Welcome to hell."